So we are going to do a quick session on the import process of openlibrary and discuss briefly the openlibrary client and also what we are currently doing to import IA-style books and MARC records into openlibrary and what the future might look like.
Okay, I will share a screen. Right, so importing into openlibrary, there are a number of pages on the wiki that deal with this. One talks about the complexity of the past and the multiple methods of importing. We're trying to refine this down to one or a minimal set of ways to import. The way to see the current API for importing is at wiki endpoints. If you look down here, there's an importing section, and there are two main API import endpoints. Posting to API/import, which will let you post some sort of data format directly to that endpoint that you'll send a whole JSON packet or MARC record or Onyx feed. And this one is not fully tested and brought up to speed and current because there's a bit more complexity to that. And we've been talking about what it will take in the future, maybe for 2019, to bring this up to standard. The area I've been working on is a simpler import process, which uses importing from archive.org by passing an identifier. So the main difference between these two endpoints is for this second /IA endpoint, you don't pass the data you want to import directly to the endpoint. You pass a reference to an identifier from archive.org. And then openlibrary will look up that identifier in archive.org and do the import based on what it finds there. The reason I focused on this is because it was simpler. There were immediate use cases for that from archive.org, and a lot of the groundwork had already been in place, and there is good trusted data on archive.org to import there. So it felt like a quicker path to set some of the groundwork for importing in general. So this documents the post body. It's really only three things that you can set, and at the minimum, all you need is an identifier. And that will look up an item on archive.org, check whether it has a MARC record, and then import that MARC record. So the bulk of imports here are done from MARC record, which will be loaded on the archive.org item. This is example data to import a single archive.org item, identifier, and that's all. So the thing I added recently is the bulk MARC format, which is some of the items we have in archive.org are a single book item. So you go there and you can see the scan. If it's borrowable, you can borrow it. If it's public domain, you can read it. And it will have a single MARC record that represents that book. These bulk MARC items are sort of data items rather than book items. And that's just one or more giant MARC files of lots of library records put together. And this bulk MARC true will allow you to step through that raw data and import items one by one.
And for instance, on archive.org, there's a special collection called OL_data, which is essentially a collection that has hundreds of different repositories of MARC records, many of which have already been imported into openlibrary, but we have actually millions of MARC records that we are about to add into the OL data repository that might be imported through this method.
I'll since I'm sharing my screen, I'll show you an example of one of these. If I go archive.org details, so this is just from the example that was on the page. What have I done wrong there? Hmm. Live demos, eh? I thought that was a safe one to pick. What's the trend?
We could just choose OL underscore data and then choose something from that list.
Yes, sorry, that's what I was trying to think of.
With an underscore, though.
Let's edit this. Here we go. This is all of them. This is the main collection of things that you could want to import. So these are not books. These are collections of MARC records. So there are a number of files, a very large number of files for this. They can have one or more. Yeah, these will be the records. So there's different file extensions that's kind of managed in there. But this is the kind of thing. So Birmingham Library MARC records, Boston Public Library, they're all collections. So the process for uploading a large collection of books would be to create an archive.org item for these, upload the various MARC files, and then you can step through record by record from these. So I will show you an example of the two endpoints. So if I go into Python, just do a handy copy and paste that I prepared earlier. So this is using the openlibrary client to basically leverage its session and authentication built-in methods. There are no actual...
It's worth noting that previously the OL configure command was run with an archive.org/openlibrary account, which has bot access and API access, I believe.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, yeah, I've got access, bot access to write to openlibrary. So you need permissions to do this. So I've configured my openlibrary client with my my bot access so I can import. So I'm just going to do this like live typing. OL session post openlibrary base URL, and then we add the API endpoint, which we want to use this import IA. Sorry. And because this is a post, we want to send it some data and identifier. We will do the single identifier example at the moment. We can just actually copy and paste from the example here. And I'll save it to a variable so we can inspect it.
And closing button at the end.
Thank you. So really, this is the simple version. So the only data we are posting is a archive.org identifier, actually. And I can show you what that actually is, so you can see how it's meaningful. If we go again to archive.org details, you will see this is a book item. We have all our archive.org data, and we have an XML file. So it's something we can import by MARC record. So if I just hit enter on that, and it's going to make a post, and then if we look at the response, what it is, we'll see we've got a 200 response. Now that means nothing broke. We didn't get a 404, we didn't get a 500. Something good happened. If we want to actually see what the response was, we get a nice little JSON response here telling us what happened. So overall, we got a success true, which is why it's a 200. But at the addition level, status is matched, and it tells us what the addition is. And for a work level, it was also matched. So what this tells us that we didn't actually change anything. It was a match, but the end result of us having that book in openlibrary is what we've got. So it's successful. So nothing was imported.
And how would this change in the event that We don't have a single item. We have a MARC repository, such as the ones in OL data.
Sure.
We don't necessarily need to do it live. Suffice to show, like, does the identifier change, or...
I was hoping to do a live endpoint, although it's annoying that this isn't a direct... let's see. What can we do? We can do this live. We'll just change it. So what we'll do here, the identifier then is, we'll pick an identifier from over here, BPL mark. So that becomes the identifier. Now the identifier becomes more complicated in that it's identifier colon the offset within a mark file. Sorry. We also need to pick a file. We'll pick the first file there. So it's details colon the file name, the offset within the file name. So the first record is at 0, and then the length. And this is sort of a bit of a shortcut trick, that if you put the number 5 in there, it'll read the actual length of the record and figure it out. It'll do multiple requests until it gets the full, or 2 requests until it gets the full one. So identifier, the definition of identifier is more complicated here. We've got archive.org item colon file name colon offset colon length. And that should be explained here. And there we go, helpfully. Details / file name. So I've made a mistake there, so I can correct that, but it is documented there. So OCA ID, which is the ID, file name, offset length. And importantly, I need to add in bulk mark equals true. Say it's a bulk mark. Otherwise, it will try and import that as a book and not find a mark record and complain about it.
You might need quotes around the bulk mark key.
I will. Thank you. Thank you for the live QA. So that should be sufficient, and we will see how that responds.
Colon.
Colon. Yep.
Woohoo!
So we have a response 200. This is interesting because I don't actually know whether we probably should have this, but we can see. The response will tell us. There we go. Modified. So what this does, it tells us we had the record in there. The book was OL. That was its ID, but it's modified. So we've changed something. We've imported something new. So it found a match. It made it. So this means that it may have been imported by some other method or from another library, or a user added it. It found a title and name match. So it modified an existing record. So that status could be matched, modified, or created. If it says created, you know you've created a new item. We've also got the work. We modified that. And then because we've done a bulk mark, it tells us the next record offset and the next record length, which means if we want to step through this file, where I put 0 and 5, I just need to go...
We can have a for loop.
And yeah, and this way the client, whatever bot or whatever you're doing, you can control that and step through, but it gives you the option to pick the next record. What do we want to do from here? Do we want to look at that book and see what we did?
Yeah, seems good to me. And then maybe we can talk about the future or upcoming steps. For instance, if we wanted to in the future import Onyx or import just by arbitrary JSON.
So this is my bot, cleanup bot. It was edited a minute ago. So yeah, a big part of this process was tidying up. The recent work I've been doing is making re-imports a sensible option, that something exists.
Should we look at the diff?
Re-import it. And yeah, It should be doing right and sensible things. Okay, so all we added is a source record to say that this record is represented by this source, and that's
which is great.
So yeah, we didn't actually add any more, which is kind of good that we had good data as far as the re-import was concerned already, but now we know that we have another source to verify this. And if we look, right, okay, so originally this was created in 2008 from an Amazon.com record, but now we have a library mark record that backs it up and supports that data. So it's kind of strengthening the data connections. But we got a 200 response. We added some metadata. It's kind of better. And we can just step through all of those records and it will do the right thing. It will create new records, or it will add these references, or it will fix some issues with that.
And so what's missing with the generic import? Because in these two cases, we were either directly importing an archive.org item, or we were referencing a special type of archive.org item which contained bulk MARC files. And so I could imagine either parsing an Onyx feed, or having Amazon data, or any of several types of JSON data that we might want to import into OpenLibrary. But you mentioned that the /API/import isn't quite ready to go yet?
Yes, there are. Predominantly, it needs documentation and testing. The code that is exercised for this should be pretty much the same paths. It should go through the same process. But the first step is really documentation. So there is kind of an internal JSON representation that these MARC records are converted into. We just need to document that and then add some testing around if you upload a MARC file directly, post a MARC file directly to this endpoint, check that it is converted in the same way, and similarly for an Onyx file, that it is converted in the same consistent way to a internal JSON representation. And when we have that internal JSON representation, we will also be able to post that directly to this endpoint. So a lot of that code exists. It will accept, there exists code to ingest an Onyx record, a MARC record, and straight JSON, and it will tell the difference between each of those. It's more around documenting and adding tests to confirm that the right things are done. And I believe there are small holes and differences between each of those input formats. So it's really focusing on the JSON format as the first one, and then ensuring we convert correctly from Onyx to that JSON. MARC record should be actually quite easy, so long as we make sure that it goes through the main MARC, the same MARC processing that this endpoint uses. But as it stands, there were actually kind of two paths to import MARC records, and I've tried to unify them and take the best, and I've definitely put that on this IA endpoint. It just needs confirmation that I've done similar to the direct import and haven't broken anything. So again, investigation, documentation, and testing are the initial steps.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charles. Tavish, did you have any questions?
No?
He might be muted or frozen.
Well, I hope that's a basic introduction to what can be done importing from Internet Archive items, and this can be extended into more generic imports that have a wider application. At some point, the OpenLibrary client needs to be updated to leverage this API, but I think an important first step is just having a good API that's well documented, that isn't too complex to be used directly. So that's a goal for 2019, and I think that's quite achievable.
Wonderful. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Tavish.